Hey there! Today we're going to talk about an ink by a brand we have not yet covered in the Inkcyclopedia, and that is Cross. Cross hooked me up with two of their inks, the only two bottled inks they make, black and blue. I thought today we would start with blue. They come in these little cardboard boxes. There's nothing too fancy on there. It kind of fits in with the pen boxes they do. Just a simple cardboard box. Alright, then we have the ink. The ink comes in this bottle, and it's a nice amount of ink, 62.5 milliliters, that's 2 ounces. And the bottles reminded me a bit of the Pelican bottles. Not sure whether you noticed the same, but they sort of have the same shape. So if you would, take a Pelican ink and you would wash that in very cold water, then probably you would get this. So, interesting bottles. What I love about this bottle is that it's very easy to just dip your pen in. It doesn't really matter whether it's a big nib or a small nib. You get a fairly wide opening, and you just put it in there and you ink it up. Now, I mentioned this specifically because recently for this video I wanted to compare it to another blue, and I used Caran d'Ache Blue Sky. Now this is a beautiful ink bottle, but if I take a 149 nib and I put it in there, it doesn't even, the feed just sticks out. I cannot fill a 149 from this bottle, even though it's completely full. So this looks gorgeous. I think it looks maybe a bit fancier than this bottle, but this bottle works and this bottle doesn't. So that's the difference. Alright, having said that, it's a blue ink. It's one of those, I think, fairly stereotypical fountain pen ink blues that you may know from school, or from what I think this is what a lot of people think of when they think of fountain pen ink that is blue. No excessive shading. It's not spectacular in that regard, but this is one of those robust inks. You just put it in a pen, it writes, and some inks don't do that. So for me, this is a good, reliable blue that I would like to put in pens that I'm testing out. I know that the ink will perform well, won't do anything weird. No excessive bleed through, no excessive feathering, just one of those nice, well-performing inks. I think that's all there is to it. So what we're going to do next is test the ink in a lot of ways. I hope that's going to be useful. I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Okay, so here we go with Cross Blue. Let's start with some fine writing. Alright, then medium, a medium nib. Then a broad nib. And then an italic nib. And finally, let's try to do some flex writing. Yep, we get the railroading. It was inevitable, and now the pen stops to write. To counter this, I have added another flex pen to the arsenal here. Which, unlike the other one, writes straight away. I think that in future installments of the Inkcyclopedia I shall avail myself of this pen, and no longer the nudeless pen, because it's too finicky. I'm not complaining about the brand, I mean, I love nudeless, but this is not working, and this pen is. Now I'm going to get a million questions about this pen. This is a Surwex MB. I have a review of that on my channel on YouTube should you need it. Right. I think it's time for us to do some passes, and while the first passes are drying, we can have a look at what we have written. 1, 2, 3. Alright. So, what can we say about this ink, shading, etc.? Well, I don't think this is an ink that shades excessively. In fact, I'm trying to take a good look. You see some variation. I think this is a bit darker than that, but I think it's a fairly consistent ink. There's not a lot of shading going on. This, I think, is the case with many blues. Blue inks often tend to do that, I think. But it's very legible, and it's one of those typical fountain pen blues. Alright, I think we have to do some testing. Let's try and see. Almost dry except for the bottom bits. Let us do some writing with a large 6mm nib. C for cross, and then we also do a bit of medium writing. The man was crossed. That is, I am. They hooked me up with 2 nice pens. Okay, so I think this is dry. Let's add a second pass. Okay. And while that is drying, I think there are 2 things we can do. First of all, this is dry, so we're going to have a look at that interesting moment where we try to erase our writing with the bastard brush. And we'll just see what happens there. This is not yet entirely dry, so I cannot go on to the eyedropper of death. So I think we'll have to do something else while we are waiting. And the best thing we can do is, of course, that moment you have all been waiting for, the Tardif test. A nice smear of ink. Okay, and while we are at it, I think this would be a very good moment to test out the brown benchmark. pretty decent benchmark. Not too shabby. Alright, let's have a look at this, because I think it's time for a third pass.
You shall not pass!
There we go. Alright, what can we deduce from the Tardif test? Well, I think it confirms the suspicion that this is not an ink that shades excessively. You see some lighter bits and some darker bits, but they are really quite close together. So it's not a very fancy shader, which, as far as I'm concerned, is fine. I mean, sometimes you just want a neutral ink that is not, too flashy. And I think this would work very well for that. Same goes for the brown benchmark. I think we also we can see here this a bit of shading from darker to lighter blue, but it's not excessive. Now when you look at different nibs, so here you would have a non-saturated nib and a highly saturated nib and something in between. You see that the ink runs from a, well, not extremely light blue, but a lighter blue to a fairly dark blue. So if you would have a really saturated nib, you kind of see that in this Lamy Safari broad nib, which is a very wet nib. It's a quite dark blue, whereas in finer nibs it's a bit lighter. Of course, it's a bit less ink that's been written onto the page. Alright, I think this is dry, so I think we can move to the eyedropper of death. And see what that does. Alright, finally we should conclude something about waterproofness. Well, clearly the eyedropper of death is helping there, but we can also have a look at this. I would not call this a very waterproof ink. Clearly the reading is legible in some bits, but in other bits it's almost entirely gone. It's not advertised as being waterproof, at least not as far as I can see. Nope, nothing on the box. So there you have it. I think that's it's not as bad as I expected. A lot of blues are just eradicated, and at least you see some writing left there. So not bad. Okay, then I think we should start to work on our score card, so that we get a bit of an impression of the ink. The first thing we have is cleaning. Well, I have cleaned it out of a pen yet. Cleaning. And that was fairly easy, and as you can see, it's not an ink that will really stick into a pen. Water will actually take care of it. I'm just getting rid of the excess water there, and as you can see, writing is almost gone there. So I think that lens supported this. So cleaning would be very easy. I give that a 1. No weird issues, no residue, no odd stuff. Bleed through on the page. That is something we'll have to assess later when I've done a sample on copier paper. We have color. Well, I would say the color is blue. Maybe you disagree. We have shading. Shading is not excessive. So for shading, I'm going to give this... Yes, I'm going to give this a 3, which is the lowest score, because I really don't... I mean, even in the flex writing, I really don't see any noticeable shading, which is fine, but it's what it is. And then we have flow. Well, flow is very good, no issues there. We have feathering. I have to wait until I see this on copier paper before I can really make a decision. Drying time, I would say, is pretty good. It dries fairly quickly. You saw that some bits were wet for a while, but that's with a 6mm nib on Rhodia paper. I leave that open. I want to see that on copier paper, but my assumption is that it's going to dry fairly quickly there. And then finally we have waterproofness. Well, you still see a bit of it. It's not completely eradicated, so I'm going to give that a middle score of 2. I'll add those things up when I've got the final bits of information, but first we have to change papers. I'm going to take this off. Brown Benchmark Collection Spot. copier paper. Nothing fancy, just copier paper. I'm grabbing my fine pen, which is now the Sowex MB. Where did all this come from? Interesting. A lot of blue. I'll just turn over the page. Alright, so we're starting with some fine writing. I know that people are going to ask me for that, so I just put it down there. And then we have the medium pen. Now I might as well just use the pen names. Then we have broad nibbage. Lamy Safari. We have an italic nib on the italics. Parsons Essential. We should do a bit of flex writing. Whoops, flex. Pushing it too hard there. Now my replacement pen is giving up. I was pushing it very hard with the flex there. Still think it's better. Now let me just try this. The original flex pen I used, the Noodler's pen. It doesn't do anything. Squeeze some ink. Well, that's back. Finicky. And there we go again, and it's gone. Well, it doesn't really matter. I still prefer this pen for this purpose. Okay, and I want to do some really fat writing, so that we can get a bit of an idea of feathering or stuff on cheaper paper. That's right, all you calligraphers out there. Of course, you're not really supposed to put down that little dash in there first, but that's the way I do it. Bear with it. Okay, so what can we deduce from all of this? In the regular writing, I don't see any feathering. I see feathering in the flex writing, both for the as what's called MB and the Noodler's flex pen, but mainly for this one. But I was really pushing it hard there. And then when it comes to this really broad nib, a 6mm nib, I don't think I see any feathering, even in these very wet spots. So I would say feathering is really, really under control. Maybe we should, I'm just going to blot a bit there. Alright, what about bleed through? Well, the normal writing I don't see any bleed through. It just starts to get a little tacky with the flex nib, but that was to be expected, and the really broad nib. This is something else. There's a lot of bleed through there, but that is exceptional and excessive writing on cheaper paper. When it comes to the Rhodia, the only bleed through I see is with the brown benchmarks. So I would say that's pretty good. Then we have a scorecard to finish. We have bleed through, which I would say is very good. I mean, it's really with the super wide flexi nibs that this is an issue. We have feathering, which I would say is very good. I mean, again, that's really with flex writing on cheaper paper that this is an issue. Drying time I thought was pretty good. You can even see that on this paper. I mean, that is dry now, so it looks pretty good. I'm going to give that a full score too. So that means that we got us some total inkage of 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Alright, and then finally let's compare this to another blue ink, if you want to have an alternative. What I have here is that flex pen again. So this would be cross blue. It would flexi, look something like this. And just coloring a bit, it would look something like that. Now, an ink I thought is a little bit like that is Caran d'Ache. This doesn't write, of course, I could expect that. Alright, I got that covered. Caran d'Ache Blue Sky, which is another blue that I think looks a bit like it. Another neutral blue. There are others. I could think of Mont Blanc Royal Blue, of course, the Boy Scout among inks, Waterman Florida Blue. There are other options, but I think this also is a very nice, rich, how shall I put that? Standard blue, and I don't use that in a derogatory way. It's just, you know, one of the standard fountain pen blues, and there you have it. So, Inkcyclopedia entry for cross blue. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.